Hello, everyone. Welcome to the June 20th, 2019 KUDO community meeting. I'm Tom Runyon. I'll be your host. Looks like we have a relatively small group here live today, but hopefully we can get through some good stuff. I know Justin's here to talk about testing later. I have a couple KEPs open, which I'm excited about. And Fabio should hopefully be able to talk about implementation of KEP 9 and installing frameworks. Was anyone present during the 030 planning meeting to get a better understanding about what the goals of that release were that they can go over?
I wasn't. I was the most of the week sick, sorry.
Okay. I think there was an action item from last week for Jared to add planning meetings and grooming meetings to the KUDO community calendar. I have not seen those come through. But it looks like there is an 030 release planned based on the issues probably next week. From the project board, it looks like the goals of that are the new package format for frameworks. And Elena's been working on the install from the KUDO CLI to be able to absorb those and spit out CRDs that can be consumed by the KUDO controller. That seems to be the primary goal of that release. Continuing on, big merge this week was Justin's testing framework. Justin, if you mind going over a little bit of that from a high level, and then what you think the next steps are in terms of implementation.
Yeah, so I went ahead before the meeting and merged the PR that integrates us into the framework CI. So now when you submit a PR to the frameworks, it will run the test, which is currently just a Zookeeper test. I have a bunch of documentation ready and written. There's a PR up for that, so hopefully I'll merge that later today.
And PR in frameworks or PR in KUDO?
In KUDO.
Okay.
So then it'll go hopefully on the KUDO website, and then framework developers can look at it there. And then I have some code locally ready to integrate it into KUDO control, which should make it easier to work with and have a better UI. And then, but beyond that, we mostly need people to write tests. So, yeah.
That's great. I think our original plan was Zookeeper and Kafka as introductory frameworks. So I think now that we have your framework for testing those frameworks, if I could say framework one more time, that'd be perfect. But we can start.
Yeah, I've been very explicit about it being a test harness.
Harness, thank you. That's a better word. Now that we have a harness ready, application framework developers should start using those for those two specific frameworks as they become more mature. And I don't know who's got ownership and point on developing each of those frameworks. Does anyone know who's going to be taking responsibility for that? Great.
I know I've seen some chatter from DSS about it.
Okay. I suspect I'm and Fabio are the owners of the Flink one because we're the people who have committed there. Someone else made a Redis one as an example.
I heard someone made a RangoDB one.
Oh, I wonder who that could have been.
Yeah.
I was hoping he'd be on today, actually.
Maybe joining later.
Great. So, Justin, as part of your harness in the frameworks repo, is there a guide on how to add additional tests to your particular framework, or are those inherited by default, or what's the process there?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
I've got some tests for Kafka. How do I get those running at PR time?
Okay. If you just add them into the frameworks repo under Kafka/tests, then they can go there. The documentation that I'll merge later this afternoon will go in detail into all of that. And
Excellent.
so hopefully somebody can follow that and let me know how that goes.
Yeah, that'd be great. We might want to point to that documentation from the frameworks repo, so that when someone goes
Okay.
to the frameworks, or maybe an issue template or a PR template inside the frameworks, so that's clear.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Oh, and since I was out, Justin, how did you do the PR to update CAP 10 about like how tests are distributed, or if they should be part of that bundle or not?
Not yet. That will come next, is figuring out like long term how we want to install everything before we run the tests.
Exactly.
I was going to hopefully figure that out this week or something.
Yeah, so I've talked with Jared, and we just want to ship right now, I think, in the distribution, the CRDs, and not the test itself, I think, as part of the bundle. I think that just needs better wording than in the CAP, so it's clear. Yeah, cool.
Sounds good.
Yeah, thanks.
Great. Ken, you also have a PR open regarding testing from the KUDO controller perspective. Did you want to go over that? Very briefly.
I do have a PR. I'm not sure. Well, it's worth, I guess, bringing it up in this forum, just with an opinion. There is previously decided we were going to separate unit tests from integration tests, and integration tests, including API validation as well. Essentially, all the things that we needed Cube Builder to test. So when Cube Builder is required to be in your path, that's what we're challenged by a little bit. The way those tests are managed, still looking for ways to separate out those concerns. That's what that PR was originally supposed to be about. There was some question about whether we should rip out Cube Builder as a dependency completely. Again, that was a conversation between at least Jared and I. After some discussion, some thought, and basically Alex A's latest integration test, which there's also a PR for, there's a lot of value in what it's bringing. So I don't think there's any contest, or I don't think that's contested at all. I think what we are trying to do now is to ensure that we are using integration tests in a way that we described. We should either change what we describe, or we should rectify the situation. So one of those two things. At this point, what I would really like to do, there's also just a lot of test mains that were generated, I suppose, when we were in the early Cube Builder days, that really aren't adding any value at all. They were boilerplate code that were committed to the repository in just a large, commit, and they were viewed as, I actually don't know how they were viewed at the time, but now I'm viewing them as noise, in that they actually don't do anything, and the blanks that were supposed to be filled in were not filled in. I would like to rectify my current pull request by removing, by only including in that pull request the test mains that are not adding any value, and then we'll go from there. My hope is past that, we will also have a better understanding of how the test main is integrated and how we might be able to control that. If I had a goal, my goal would be, I want to be able to run unit tests in complete isolation from integration tests, that they are separate invocations, that maybe there's a dependency that a smoke test of unit happens before integration. I'm cool with that, but that there's a separation. If I had a further goal, like the most pristine goal, I would love it if when I do run these unit tests, I don't actually have to have a dependency of Cube Builder on my platform at all. And that's really just being clean with my dependencies and such. But again, that's a secondary goal. Hopefully we'll get there. We'll see. Does that explain the position on that a little bit?
Yes, so the crux is that you're trying to match up the current testing environment with KEP 4. Nope, KEP 4.
Yeah, KEP 4. Going along with your PR, Ken, I also put up a PR yesterday to actually enforce the build tags for everything that is currently an integration test. So once both of our PRs are merged, we make test, runs unit test, make integration test, runs unit test, and integration test.
Love it. Thanks, man. I'll review that as well.
Justin, when you say integration test, do you mean the KubeBuilder style, like where API server and etcd is spun up locally? So,
yeah.
Or do you mean like against a full-blown Kubernetes cluster?
No, I mean against env tests, like controller runtime.
Okay. So, just out of curiosity, how does this work? Like, is it something that KubeBuilder brings to the table, or do you spin them up?
Yeah. So KubeBuilder provides an env test, which is just a wrapper for starting the Kube API server and etcd. So you have to have the Kube API server and etcd binaries locally. It takes about 5 seconds for them to start up. And then you basically have an API server that you can interact with and connect the KUDO controller to and such. You can also use the fake client for running tests. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. And that doesn't do any API services. Those are more in like the unit test category. But yeah, this would just be the env test, controller runtime stuff to start with at least.
So it still stays the M test.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah, that will stay there. We probably want to have some kind of either a Docker image that already has those in it, or those binaries, or like a makefile target to download them or something, to make that easier for people.
Okay, got it. Thanks.
Thanks, guys. And as we get more refinement on this testing suite, updates to KEP4 would be the right place to capture those and motivation. So if we do have issues with the implementation, that's where we should address them, talk about them, and then go implement as we're doing. Good. KEP9, Elena was working on the install process via the KUDO CLI to accept packages with the new format defined by KEP 009 that I think merged or is approved to be merged now. I don't believe there is a current tarball repo anywhere, however, to test that. All the tests were done locally with a fake file system inside of the Go test. So Fabi is the resident repo expert. Do you guys have a plan for deploying those with the new structure, or?
Yeah, there's currently a PR 21 in the frameworks repo for that new structure, and that is as long as we don't have automation around this, we manually upload it to our official repo, I guess. And then we have a test.
Actual manual, tar, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
Yeah. Ooh. Okay.
Well, that's what we wanted for 030 to have it actually automated with Circle CI or so.
Well, I'm looking forward to that PR too.
Yeah. But yeah, that would be, I was wondering that too, and I saw that we have in the tests the actual CRDs for testing, as you mentioned it, but we don't have the actual tarball yet where we can like try the install. So what I do before I upload it to the official one, probably I use a test repo to see if it works. And then there's already a lot of like feedback. That PR is 2 days ago, so probably merging it tomorrow or today. Yeah.
Great. So as soon as her PR4 install goes in, though, all our docs are going to not work until we update the public repo.
Yeah, it's kind of dependent. So like I rather have the what is it, 353 or so, 343 merged in KUDO, and then we can merge 2.1. Otherwise, yeah, you have that problem.
So for demos, thinking Matt and Jorg, they should be using 020 CLIs until we get the repo changed, and then the CLI plugin should be 030.
Yeah, we're like yes, and like, I haven't looked over the PR actually. I think so from the first viewpoint when I look over it, it seems to be still 010. So that's a little bit confusing. I think it should be 020. So you can even for a demo perspective, if you use the old CLI, you could just like say package version 010, and then you still go with the old one, not the new one. You know what I mean?
So you're saying that all framework versions are being updated to 020 to match the new structure in KUDO 020?
No, that's just coincidental. I'm like for each framework version, we should follow also Semver 2, and then this is a feature upgrade here and the structure change of the current 010. So I would just like call it 020, and if we do another change, it would be 030. That kind of like crosses with 020 accidentally, KUDO, but not meant to be. You know.
So during demos, if they have an older CLI version, they can just use framework version 010.
I think that, yeah, exactly. That should be the way how we deal with this. We overrode when we switched everything to Go templating and the new structure. And I think we shouldn't do that by now because people use already a lot of demos. Yeah.
Great. So you're going to write that all down.
Yeah, I'll comment also on the PR. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know where the right place for that necessarily is. We still need an install from disk. I think that'll be helpful, but that shouldn't be too much work given all the work Elena did on the tarball install.
Install from disk, you mean also like there was the thing with caching and syncing with the official repo? You mean having it locally stored and cached?
More like I have a folder that I'm doing development on.
Oh yeah.
I'd like to install
from there.
framework version that has those raw files on disk.
Yep.
And actually, looking at Alina's PR, the code for that is already there. So.
Exactly. You're right. It's not a lot of work. You just remove a step, and then you do everything that she does already. So she tackled the hardware problem first, which is good. Okay. Any other questions on installs and what's going on there? Okay. My two keps will start with 12 because that's the first number. Framework extensions. So there's been requests, feature requests for how do I take a framework that does mostly what I need to do and provide additional customization for my particular business case. And there are particular examples. For instance, let's suppose we're running MySQL open source, but my organization requires database backups to be stored on wherever. Being able to adjust the backup and restore jobs without modifying or without needing to fork and modify the existing open source framework so that updates on that open source framework kind of get propagated in once I reference the new version. Having that be an easy process. There could be some other large vendors who would like to provide frameworks that are supported by them. Rather than having two separate versions of a framework, one open source and one supported by Mesosphere, whomever, hypothetically, we can all have the same open source functionality core and then provide the extensions for the additional customization that Mesosphere is providing for that particular framework. And I know this was something that was brought up in the DCOS world where there were open source versions of Cassandra and then DCOS Mesosphere versions of Cassandra, for instance. And it wasn't always clear that those weren't the same core structure that was extended to provide additional functionality. They were really two separate entities and weren't compatible. So this is an effort to allow for that extension capability to leverage all the open source where it's available and only provide the additional functionality where needed. Please, comments are welcome. I think it's in a pretty good state based on a lot of conversations I've had with several people here already about what that looks like. So luckily we've kind of been talking about it for the past 3-4 weeks. So I think it's in a better state, but I definitely want feedback on what it looks like. And there's some outstanding questions about how do I resolve a framework version that I want to extend, and where does that happen? And then from the implementation details, how does that get stored on in our Kubernetes environment? So those are definitely the opinions I want to have some feedback on. Any questions? 13 is the other KEP that I opened this week. And this particular KEP talks about non-KUDO application definitions. Specifically, there are other application specs that are out there, Helm, CNAB, general operators, that people might want to run in KUDO. And I think as a standalone entity, CNAB makes sense because there isn't an engine that deploys that to Kubernetes. But running Helm with KUDO doesn't really make sense unless you look at it in the lens of KEP 12. And that's really kind of related to that environment where I want to take a Helm chart that has all this functionality that's been built out and developed by experts in both the application and how to run it in Kubernetes. And then how do I add my custom plans to that? So I've got this, again, MySQL Helm chart. Great. How do I provide backup and restoration plans for best practices on top of that chart rather than having to convert everything into a KUDO format and then provide the functionality there? And then when people change and improve the Helm chart, we don't have to worry about propagating those changes in a KUDO specific manner. So we want to be able to have these core base frameworks defined in other formats. And that's the standalone capability, but always looking at it in the lens of, because we want to provide our KUDO-isms to those other application formats. So definitely feedback on that one too. Definitely want to hear that. I think that's going to be a good adoption one. Once people realize and can see that capabilities in 12 and 13 land, now all of a sudden they can take their Helm charts that they've been using and provide upgrade plans and update processes and backup and restoration and all those operations they perform on their Helm charts. Rather than scripting those out, they're going to be able to kind of do those inside the KUDO environment. I think that'll be really good. So there's no questions on either of those. Come on, guys. All right. I was hoping Jorg would be here to get some feedback on his demo, but Matt, have you done KUDO demos recently? I'd love some feedback on what the demos look like and what works well and what doesn't work well and what people seem interested in. Hello? All right.
Matt, you're still muted.
All right, maybe he stepped away, which is fine. Jared's not here to talk about the planning meetings getting added to the calendar, but I didn't see those if anyone else did. All right, we have like 10 or 15 minutes left. Why don't we open it up to some general discussion about whatever people are interested in. Okay, so I'm interested in a fix for issue 58. Right now, several of our updates don't actually work. They don't update because we haven't hard-coded it in this creator update function that worked differently than how we thought when we originally implemented it. So I want to tackle this as a more generic solution for how do we do these updates. And it essentially requires a strategic merge between the objects that are generated from the rendering engine with the objects that are in the cluster. There's a capability called server-side apply that got maybe merged recently, maybe backed out for 1.15. It's not exactly clear, which would allow us to throw any generic object at the server and have it handle this merge process and figure out what values need to be updated and which ones get carried over from pre-existing state. So I think that'll be a good long-term solution, but until that's GA, we probably want to have our own solution in place, especially with a lot of Kubernetes environments not necessarily enabling server-side apply by default. So I'm going to work on a more generic update function to allow us to be able to actually run the Zookeeper tests and change the memory and actually have it change the objects on disk and not fail, rather than not changing things and making sure that it didn't change.
Would that live in the engine package, or where do you think about it?
It's going to be in the plan execution controller reconcile loop, because once we get these objects from the engine, we're going to need to apply them strategically against the objects that are in our environment.
The new version of controller runtime 2.0 has a patch method that supports strategic merge that might help us out.
Thank you. Can you send me a link to that or post that on issue 15?
I will.
Awesome. Because that might.
I actually documented that in my upgrade ticket, suggesting that we upgrade.
Yes, I did see the request, and someone else had mentioned it's still alpha or something.
Yeah, probably better than relying on new releases of Kubernetes, though.
Right. So yes, that would be ideal. So I'll work on.
Assuming that it doesn't use that feature.
Right. Okay, so that's something that I'm going to start tackling. Well, if nobody else has anything, I guess we can.
One thing I noticed when I did the Flink one was, I think I mentioned it to you already, was a weird race condition, but I saw Alexei made also a race condition issue, or I read something earlier with race condition. So what happened was it needed persistent volume claims, but for some reason those were just like applied to the API afterwards. So the order was totally messed up, which led to a race condition. So it was constantly pending, looking for that PVC. It didn't work. So essentially,
you should have made that a separate step. That happened earlier.
Yeah. So putting that into a separate step is one way. It would be a way of like the when we apply those things that we follow a certain order in KUDO itself or in the CLI. Would that help?
I hesitate to put logic of application ordering inside of KUDO when the whole point is that we're giving you, the framework developers, a language to define that themselves.
Right. Okay. So essentially like making an extra step for everything that needs to be executed before like a bootstrap any kind of thing.
Right. And making sure that it's set to serial for the ordering.
Right. Okay. That's all I got.
All right. Well, we can end it a little early. I volunteered Elena for next week's, so she'll be our host. She, as host, has requested to move it 2 hours earlier to make it a little easier on the Central European time zone. So that'll be at 8 a.m. Pacific, 11 a.m. Eastern, and 5 p.m. Central.
No objection. All right. Ruled.
Excellent. Well, thank you everyone for your time, and we hope to see you all next week.
Thank you for asking, Tom.
My pleasure.